everybody, welcome to my behind the scenes book creation video for The Divided Kingdom. This is my first ever fiction book that I'm going to be publishing. I'm filming this video currently 2 weeks before release day. So this is going to be coming out on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. I'll show you the back too. This is the back cover of it. This is the front cover, the spine. So this is a young adult Christian dystopian novel. This is book 1 in a 3-book trilogy. I've already written all 3 books at this point. I just need to go back and substantially edit each of the books. But I just wanted to kind of talk about my process of how this book came to be, share a little bit with you about the storyline, about the characters, about my author inspiration behind the book. So I hope you'll tune in and enjoy this video. Okay, so first of all, what is this book about? I'm going to go ahead and start by reading you the back cover blurb to the book. So Adeline, she's the main character. She's a 22-year-old young adult, adores books, history, and art. But she feels unseen in a society that values advance in medicine and technology above all else. With her father as the leader of their island civilization called Mir, she has little room for error. To ensure peace and eliminate violence, the islanders are divided across 3 separate communities and commanded to abide by the 613 laws given to their leadership by the originator. 40 years prior, the originator guided the people to the safety of the island at a time when lawless raiders pillaged and burned their homeland. When Adeline, with the help of her 2 best friends, begins to question the community divisions and the 613 laws they live by, she is met with opposition at seemingly every turn. In her quest for answers, she meets Cade, who is experiencing a complicated reality of his own. Together they work to unravel the secrets behind the island kingdom of Mir and discover what it means to be truly seen. Okay, so that gives you a glimpse into the storyline of the book. This is very much, takes place on an island, but the people had once had a larger mainland that they inhabited, and now they're exiles on this island because of war and conflicts that had arisen 40 years before. So I actually had the first idea to write this book when I was 14 years old. So about 10 years ago now, exactly. I was an 8th grader, and I had the idea for Adeline and Cade, who are my 2 protagonists. And I went on to write the first draft of this book. It took me 4 years, so I started as an 8th grader, and I finished as a senior in high school. And after those 4 years, I had written the first draft, which was not called The Divided Kingdom. At the time, it was called The Mir That Divides Us, and the whole novel was over 100,000 words. And I was super excited. I remember thinking, I'm going to get this published. I'm going to be one of those super young authors, 18, really ambitious. But I had some people read it, and they thought that it was good, but it wasn't ready to be published. It was far away from that. I needed so many more years to develop my skills as a writer and the craft and the story. And so that book, then titled The Mir That Divided Us, sat untouched for the next, I don't know, maybe like 4 years. And then about 1.5 years ago, I returned to the book because I had recently published my very first book, which was a nonfiction devotional. And I wanted to dive back in to the fiction side of storytelling because that was what I really loved. And it was during National Novel Writing Month in 2021 that I drafted all 50,000 words of the first draft of the book. And then 3 months later in December, I had written all 80,000 words, which would end up being the total length of the manuscript. And so for the past 1.5 years, I have been writing, editing, revising. I've had lots of people read it, give their feedback. I also joined a couple writing academies that have been so helpful just to grow as an author and a writer. And so this story, it started off it's still young adult. That's how I had initially written it, with the main protagonist being in their early 20s. But the dystopian side of the story came in later drafts, because in the first draft of this book, it was all about the 2 main characters, but the world was not really fleshed out, the conflicts weren't really fleshed out, and since I wrote this as an 8th grader, I added so many other plot lines, so many other characters to the story. So the dystopian elements of the book, the fact that these islanders, there's about 500 people that live on this island, and it is run by select leadership officials. So there's a council of about maybe like 10 leaders that make most of the decisions, with 3 of them holding most of the power, and then there's one official leader who is Adeline, the main character's father. And there's all these laws that they have to live by, and if they break the rules, they only have 7 opportunities to basically mess up, and then once they've messed up more than 7 times, they're actually killed. And there's a reason for that. I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a lot of there's lethal injections, and there's brandings, and there is all of these more like futuristic, there's medical technologies and different enforcements that they're trying to place on the people that are have a lot of ethical implications to them. And so the characters are really working to figure out who they are, and they want to know why all these rules, why all these laws. They want to know why such tight, strict control from the leadership. And there's a lot of secrets about why they came to this island to begin with, and about their homeland that they just don't know. And so there's a lot of mystery, and there's a lot of unknown elements that the characters work through throughout the plot. But I wanted to talk about the reason why I called this The Divided Kingdom, is because when I started picking this book back up again to write it, I wanted to base it on something biblical, or give myself some sort of a framework. So this is not a retelling by any means, but it is inspired by the divided kingdom of Israel, which is a period in the Old Testament history where there used to be 12 tribes of Israelites, and they were all ruled by a king, but the kings became corrupt. And so eventually the 12 tribes, they split off, and 2 of them go with the current king, Rehoboam, to the south. And the other 10 tribes go with a man named Jeroboam, who was an attendant to the past king, and they go to the north. And so this idea of a once united people group being split off into 2 separate areas is exactly what is happening in this book. And one of the areas, they're both corrupt in their own way, the north and the south, but the north is far more corrupt, and they lose sight of their past, they lose sight of their history, they lose sight of their worship in God. And then the south retains more of their history, retains more of their identity. And so that whole theme of divisions and a sense of once being united, of once having a homeland that you had to leave behind and wanting to return to that, and understand your roots, are themes that stick with in this book. And there's also the 613 laws that they live by. There were 613 Old Testament laws that the Israelites had to abide by. So that's also kind of a parallel theme as well. And some of the character names will sound similar to some of the biblical characters in the Bible as well. Also, too, with this being somewhat inspired by the divided kingdom of Israel in the Bible, I think a lot of times we read the Bible, and especially the Old Testament, and we wonder how the heck does this apply to us in our day-to-day life. And so I actually love the Old Testament a lot. It can be challenging, but I wanted to have some of those Old Testament themes in a more modern book. I wanted to kind of merge together the past of the Old Testament, and not just our modern day, but even some futuristic situations that we might be finding ourselves in. And to kind of bring those together and show that the old does have a bearing on the new. And that's another theme that is prevalent in this book, is the fact that there's a history that we really have to be able to learn from. And that if we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And so the past and the present really come together a lot in this book as well. Another theme in this book, you can actually tell right from the cover, is that there's a giant wall that is blocking, this is Adeline, her view of beyond the wall. And so a sense of feeling like separated from other people, or feeling like there's a disconnect between where you're living and those around you, or feeling like those in authority are trying to confine you or limit you, who you are, who you can be, and also where you can go physically. Because these citizens of this island of Mir, they're separated into these different communities, and they're not allowed to leave these different communities. Hence the walls, the gates, the codes that separate the groups of people from each other. So there's a lot of different implications that arise because of these separations as well. This story is really all about, it's about being seen. So this theme of feeling invisible, feeling like you're not heard, you're not valued, is something that the main characters go through throughout this whole book. There's also a sense of past decisions and regret and feeling like you can't redeem yourself or you can't be forgiven or find a sense of reconciliation for past mistakes. There's also a sense of duty, of feeling torn between devotion and duty to your family as well as devotion and duty to your work and your status in your career. That's another theme. And then there's also, again, dystopian themes of like advanced medical technologies that are technological technologies that are able to happen on the island, and a sense of readers kind of working their way through the morality or the ethicalness of these things that are happening, as well as the characters working through them too. This is a great book for teenagers and young adults, but it's definitely geared for anyone. It is a Catholic Christian themed book, but it's not really that explicit. Like my intent was anyone could really, anyone who loves this dystopian genre and loves like kind of mystery would enjoy this book, even if they're not specifically Christian. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the interior of the book. You'll see at the start of every chapter, there is a little epigraph from Saint Teresa of Avila. And when I was starting to write this book, I had just read Saint Teresa of Avila's autobiography called The Book of My Life, and I absolutely loved it. And she was a writer. She was a prolific writer in her day. And so I wanted to have a saint that was kind of going to be my inspiration and inspire me as I was writing. And so over time, I loved a lot of her quotes. I loved a lot of her insights. And so I actually have a little quote from her at the start of each of the chapters, which is kind of a little bit of a fun addition there. So as I mentioned earlier, this is book 1 in a trilogy. This is The Divided Kingdom. Book 2, spoiler alert, is going to be called The Exile, and book 3 is going to be called The Return. And it follows more or less the same characters trying to figure out why they've been sent to this island, why their leadership acts the way that they do, and then eventually they're going to try to actually return to that mainland that they were forced out of 40 years before. So I'm hoping that book 2 is going to come out in maybe a couple months from now. That might be a little bit ambitious, but definitely this year book 2 will for sure come out, and maybe book 3 as well. So as I mentioned, this is coming out in 2 weeks on St. Patrick's Day, just because I was also really inspired by the setting of this book. On a 10-day trip to Ireland that my mom and I took back in 2019 before the pandemic. And so there's a lot of emphasis to, as I mentioned, Ireland is an island, the main characters are on an island, so there's a lot of sense of the water, the sea, traveling in boats. There's also, in terms of the setting, rolling hills. There's a lot of like mountain ranges and trees and beauty that I saw in Ireland. And so that was also why I wanted to have this book published on St. Patrick's Day. So a couple things I learned about writing my first ever fiction book is that revisions are really needed, and having a lot of feedback, having people read and give their thoughts is also really valuable as a writer. You also want to make sure that you have good pacing in your story. Like, I didn't want the story to feel too rushed or too drawn out, and I wanted to have my main characters, but I also wanted to show other side characters and them working through things too, and not just focusing only on my 2 main characters. I guess as a reader, maybe you can relate to a minor character, or maybe you can relate to another character that is supporting the main characters. So every single character in this book has some sort of internal or external challenge that they're working through. And I didn't want to just have a character in there to have a character in there, but I wanted them to propel the plot forward in some way or another. Probably setting descriptions and making sure that the reader feels grounded in the world is something that I really learned as well from writing this story. Also dialogue, making sure that your dialogue is true to your characters and consistent voices throughout on your dialogue as well. I learned a lot too about book formatting. I learned about cover design, what makes a good cover. And so I hope that this is the first fiction book of many to share with the world. I also wanted to share, reviews are so valuable to authors. It helps the book to be showcased more, for it to come up in searches online. So please, if you read this book and you enjoyed it, please take the time to leave a review either on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, wherever you purchase the book. It would honestly help so much. So thank you for that. And then please, if you also like this book, feel free to gift it to a friend, a family member. I really just want to get the word out about it. And I really hope that it's transformative and that it's meaningful and that it moves readers, young adults and adults alike. But I really hope that you kind of got a glimpse of me and a little bit of the inspiration behind this book. I really hope that you enjoy it. It's really been a heart project for me. I've grown so much, especially taking this story that I had 10 years ago and finally bringing it to fruition now 10 years later. Is just really amazing, and I'm just so grateful to have this book out into the world. You can also subscribe to my newsletter on my website at authoralisonramirez.com, and I hope that we can stay in touch. If you're a fellow author, my support is encouragement is to you. I love that camaraderie shared with other fellow writers. If you're a reader that's excited about this book, I really hope that there's something you can take away from this that helps you to deepen your faith or deepen your understanding of the world and humanity. So thank you for tuning in to this behind the scenes book video, and I really hope that you read and review and love The Divided Kingdom as much as I do.